I have a story to tell you today, and at the end of the story, you're going to tell me who you believe, whose side are you on. All right. So, Lisa and Frank go on a date. They go to a party. It's Friday night. At some point during the night, they do engage in some sort of sexual activity. The next morning, Lisa calls up Frank and says, "Hey, like, I feel taken advantage of. You took advantage of me last night." Frank's gut reaction is, "No, that was consensual. I did not take advantage of you." Whose side are you on, right? And you might say, there's not enough information here for me to make my decision. Okay, and fair enough. If you say that, fair enough. I think most people will have a strong opinion either way. Maybe not in a hypothetical situation, but in a real situation where Lisa and Frank, you might have a strong opinion either way of being on Lisa's side, being on Frank's side. Now, what if I were to tell you that Lisa was wasted? She was blackout drunk, could barely stand. Does that change your opinion? Now, what if I were to tell you that Frank also blackout drunk? Does this change the situation at all? And this is something that men will say, the meninists will say, what if we're both drunk? As kind of a gotcha moment, right? Like, they're trying to, prove some point. They're not interested in actually answering this question. But, what if they are both wasted? Here's the thing. The more taboo a subject is, the less nuance there's going to be around the subject, right? The less conversations we are able to have, the less, the less nuance there is. In an ideal world, they would be able to communicate effectively about this. They would be able to either have a conversation before the date, before getting drunk, about whether or not they wanted to have sex tonight, right? And likewise, have a conversation in the morning, after all is said and done, about, why Lisa felt taken advantage of and, what Frank could do in the future to not repeat this incident. They say, a woman's worst fear is getting raped and a man's worst fear is getting accused of rape, okay? And this is why they ask this question, what if we're both drunk? They're not interested in, not raping a woman. They're interested in not being accused of rape. They're not concerned with, the woman's consent. They're concerned with not being accused of breaking that consent. Now, if we lived in a world where, this didn't happen, where it wasn't the worst thing ever to be called a rapist, we wouldn't have this issue, right? I equate it to, if let's use Lisa Frank again. If Lisa said something that hurt Frank's feelings, right? Said something mean. And Frank was like, "That was really mean what you just said to me." And Lisa was like, "No, it's not. I was valid. Fuck you. I'm not lying. It's true. You are bald and fat and ugly." That would be insane, right? That would be insane. And I think anyone would be like, "Lisa, just fucking apologize and do better." You know what I mean? But, when it comes to these situations of assault, when it comes to situations of being misogynistic or racist or bigoted, people get defensive. Their first reaction is to be defensive and say, "No, I'm not that way." And, you can't reason with someone who is on the defense in this way. When someone decides, well, I guess you think I'm the devil, I guess I'm a horrible guy, I guess I'm a horrible person, like, they're not going to listen to anything you have to say, as nuanced as it is, as nuanced as it might be, as, caring and thoughtful as it might be. That person just doesn't care. Like, they just feel attacked and they're not going to be able to listen to you. Not everyone's definition of consent is the same. We are not having this conversation with each other, so we don't all have the same idea of what consent is and what consent looks like. Now, there's always going to be people that, don't really care if someone consents or not, but this is not what I'm talking about. Some people might genuinely believe that asking someone over and over until the answer is yes is consent, which, like, no, that's coercion. That's not consent. And especially if you are a man, if you are born a boy, you aren't really in conversations about consent ever, right? If you're a woman, you have spaces with other women to talk about the ways in which men have raised red flags, the ways in which men have been creepy, the ways in which you've been taken advantage of, right? But if you're a man, you're very unlikely to ever talk about things like that because, yes, men do get taken advantage of, men do get assaulted, but they often don't even see it as assault. Boys aren't taught to see themselves as prey ever, right? Like, girls are taught to look out for predators and, watch out for creepy older men and, be protective of yourself, right? And don't be alone in a room with a strange man and these different things that, like, boys aren't taught that. Boys aren't taught that they are victims. Boys aren't taught that they are prey. So they don't see themselves as victims in situations where they are very clearly the victim, right? It's like the kind of classic example, double standard of, like, the older woman with the teen boy is seen as, like, cool or whatever to his friends, but an older man and a younger girl is creepy and very wrong. It's like a double standard that people love to bring up, and it's because these boys don't see themselves as the victim. They aren't taught to watch out for these, like, predators. And it's so ingrained that, like, boys and men always want sex. Women and girls aren't horny, don't like sex, just do it because we have to, right? And it's damaging for so many reasons for both men and women. And this is implying that, women don't like sex, women can't consent. Like, women are never consenting, they're never enthusiastically giving their consent if they don't like sex, right? And, like, to go back to, like, the older woman, younger teen boy of it all, it's like, whose consent matters in that situation? It's the boy's consent, right? The boy is choosing to have sex with this grown woman, right? And in vice versa situation, like, the man is preying on a younger girl, right? So it's his consent that matters, right? Not hers. It's never the woman's consent that matters. And women are so used to just our consent not mattering that sometimes it doesn't matter to us. And it's something that men, like, just wouldn't be able to relate to. Straight men just wouldn't be able to relate to. And a lot of times as women, like, we have sex with people just because it feels easier. It feels easier than saying no, right? Not only because of the threat of violence, but just the awkwardness of saying no, of leaving someone's house and being like, nope, never mind. Like, right? It's awkward, it's inconvenient. But that's another situation where, like, a man in a similar situation wouldn't feel taken advantage of, wouldn't feel used, because, this does happen where straight men, have sex out of convenience, out of just, oh, this situation just happened, right? You're not enthusiastic about it, but, the man's not going to feel guilty. The man's not going to feel taken advantage of because, their consent, they believe that their consent matters. Everyone's consent matters, right? But women don't feel like our consent matters as much as men. And it's another thing that, like, men will say sometimes is like, oh, you just regretted having sex with me and now you're, like, calling rape or whatever. And it's like, okay, I think it's like, it's fair to regret having sex with someone. And I also think that, like, if you as a man are not fostering an environment where a woman feels safe to say no, to leave, regardless of, whether you're being violent or not, regardless of whether you ask for consent or not, if you're not fostering an environment where a woman feels safe, like, to say no, like, she's not going to say no, right? And I guess you should know, like, I'm someone that is mainly around progressive people, and, this is just where I'm coming from, is being involved in the queer community, in the leftist community. There still is an issue with rape culture, right? It's something that you can't get away from. And, it's partially the reasons that I talked about before, but it's so ingrained in our society that there is no place where you can go where patriarchy doesn't exist, right? Even if you're in a room full of, like, leftist queer women, to patriarchy, like, it still affects us, right? We still have internalized ideas, we still have lived in it our whole lives. There is no getting away from it. And that's the thing, is like, you could be the most progressive person, like, politically, but it doesn't mean that you're not a rapist. I don't know why that made me laugh. No, I'm just uncomfortable. But for real, like, I think people are under the impression that this is only, like, Republicans, this is only, like, you know, an issue with people that aren't leftist, which is very untrue. Like, if you are someone involved in progressive communities, you know that this is still very much an issue. And again, it's just something that we can't get away from. And it's something that, men that are, progressive still have this knee jerk reaction of being like, no, what are you talking about? I'm not a rapist. You're trying to ruin my life, or you're, just coming up with excuses, or so and so. And, like, I don't know, we've all seen it with certain celebrities, we've all seen it with certain YouTubers that are quote unquote progressive. And, no one is safe. No one is safe from this, is really my point. But I think that if we have conversations, if people are able to, not go on the defense, and able to, understand that anyone can be a victim, that, the world would just be a much better place. And obviously, we have a lot of work to do, but to get into a better world. But that's just my thoughts. I don't know. Anyway, it took me too long to make this video because I'm just kind of, like, going insane. I should have written stuff down, but I didn't. So I hope you enjoyed, and leave a like, comment, subscribe, add this video to your favorites, do all the things. There you go. Have a beautiful night.